In preparation for this fourth lesson, I've blocked out my mannequin and camera animation for Tshepo's performance. This portion of the sequence, as I mentioned before, is going to be really dynamic. It was really hard trying to flesh out the camera animation. I'm caught between not doing too much, but trying not to do too little. I want this shot to have the energy and dynamism of a pop or hip hop music video. And for this particular shot, I just need the camera to be a living entity, echoing the dancer's actions, and in some cases, anticipating the dancer's actions. If you notice, towards the end, the action is moving towards the camera, even though the reference doesn't show that. I had to find a way to turn all those moves into locomotion that allows the dancer to progress forward. If you remember from my reference analysis in the first video, the dancer explodes into a puff of thick black smoke, like Nightcrawler from the Marvel movies. So the character explodes into a thick black smoke that comes towards the camera and transitions the shot to the next dancer via a black screen. Well, not to the next dancer, it's the same character doing all these moves, but it's supposed to be a transition between Tshepo and Girin's performance. The transition here, there is a change in the focal length, as I mentioned. It's going to be combined with the distortion bulge effect to transition to Tshepo's performance. But for him, as I come through, the camera just continues the same pan it was doing for Kidathegreat, and then the dynamism starts. The camera just starts moving. Sometimes I get close enough to certain moves that are more upper torso centric, then I try to zoom in so I can capture them better. And then in some instances here where the reference actually shows the camera moving, I'm trying to echo some of that same behavior. There's going to be a lot of cool camera movement during these isolations and stuff. And somewhere around here I try to get the camera back out so I can get the full shot, because there's a lot of leg dancing moves coming here. And this is where the action is progressing forward, even though Tshepo is not progressing forward. It's going to come real close to the camera, and then this slide is going to initiate that explosion into smoke. The next thing I want to deal with is the actual sketch. The actual sketch will come closer to showing what is actually going to happen. When I come back, I'll have probably drawn the whole thing so I can review it with you guys, show you what is going to happen. Or I'll come back when I'm almost done and I'll show the final stages of the sketching of his process, because I do have to incorporate a lot of, well, not a lot, but I have to incorporate a fair amount of dynamic simulations in here, and I'm trying to figure out where the best place for them to be is, or whether they should be in there at all. I might just focus on simulating the Nightcrawler smoke that transitions him to Girin's performance. But another thing you're noticing that I actually didn't touch at all is the tail. I did some blocking of the tail, but the sketch is going to show something completely different. This is where the tail is also going to come alive. When you get to this part where he's doing this really robotic style, I'm going to make sure that that robotic style is exaggerated with the character. So with all these flowy motions that he's doing here, it's going to be really gooey, and it's going to be really, I'm going to be using a lot of my bend deformers on the rig to get a really flowy, curvy motion. And then when we get here where he's doing these really robotic isolations, it's going to get very robotic. So here's the finished result. It took a lot longer than I thought. For now, I'm not too worried about simulating the bulge distortion that transitions the sequence from Kidathegreat to Tshepo's performance. I'll deal with it later, maybe when all the pencil tests are done. I might have already mentioned this, but I just want to reiterate that this comprehensive pencil testing phase allows me to test ideas and discard ideas that I was sold on at the planning phase that simply are not working. A good example of discarding ideas that aren't working is what I have settled on for the tail. As I mentioned in the previous part of the video, I wanted a lot of movement that echoed the dancer's granular moves. I had an elaborate plan to make the tail animation very robotic in some areas and smooth and wavy in others. Now I realize that taking this route distracts from the dance performance, so I've made sure that the tail animation is only secondary for most parts of the sequence and only comes forward to take center stage at strategic areas. At the beginning, I allow it to react to normal wave mechanics while still reacting to the jolts being enacted on it by the hips. Then at this opportune moment, when we zoom in for a medium shot, I allow it to have a life of its own. Then around this part where the robotic isolations are nearing an end, I allow the spreading of the arms to act as a pushing force to trigger the tail to fly screen left. Then from there, it returns to reacting to the hips. When we get into 3D, this is what I'm going to block out. But I already know that when I spline the final result, I may need to add or discard some of these ideas for the tail. It sounds a little frustrating, but it is what I've come to find out is the case with tails. Something that works in blocking simply might not translate well at the splining or smoothing stage. If you notice, for now, I've paid little to no attention to the ears and the scarf. I know that when I go to 3D, whatever ideas I have sketched here will change significantly. With the ears and the scarf, their animation will be so muted for the most part, and there's no real way for me to represent that in this simple pre-visualization stage, unless I'm doing a full-blown 2D animation on ones. When we get to the 3D stage, and I know my ups and downs for the hips, and also how my head is going to be moving, I can determine where to drag the scarf and the ears. I also have to consider what role the ears will play in acting. For the most part, they will be reacting to the head, but in some parts, just like the tail, I may need to make them emote or act. I think I'm comfortable with the camera animation, but towards the end, it feels a little zippy. It's a nice break from the nice swooping actions that precede the zippiness. So I'm going to hold my breath with that until the splining stage to see how well it's working. For now, I like what's happening. I like how it's swooping in the beginning, and then towards the end, it's really clicky or zippy. So when it comes to the smoke effect, I mentioned that I wanted to have a radial effect that comes towards the camera, but I also want it to behave like it has an initial force that makes it shoot downward towards the shot cam, which is at a low angle. Another thing I'm considering is actually making the smoke react to gravity more, so the plumes of smoke will naturally drop to the ground. This is an unnatural behavior for smoke. For most smoke, even when it's thick, it has a really high buoyancy, and as it gets thinner, it should dissipate and rise. So if I make it too heavy, I'm risking the possibility of making it not look too smoke-like. Ultimately, I'll have to see if the heavy feel of the smoke feels good when it's time to create it in Bifrost error. If making it react to gravity like that just doesn't look good, I'll have to discard that idea. But for now, I think I can justify it coming down towards the camera since I'm simulating an initial explosive force that makes it radiate downward towards the camera. So that's it for Tshepo's camera animation and pencil test. In the next lesson, I will move on to Girin's performance. The character is going to reform with the thick black smoke that was used to explode out of Tshepo's performance. Her performance is going to be just as long. It's about 400 frames. I'm hoping to get through it a lot faster than I did with Tshepo's pencil test, because Tshepo's pencil test took quite a long time to do. As I've said many times, this phase might seem a little excessive to some of you, but I like seeing something that gives me a glimpse into what the final is going to look like before I get started. I think it adds a lot of value to the final 3D rendered result. So I'll see you in the next lesson, where I address Girin's performance and the unique details that her part of the performance contributes to this entire production.